أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد وآله الطاهرين. Welcome, brothers and sisters, to, I think it's our 16th session on on Shia doctrine, where we discuss the different doctrines of the Shia Islam, which, of course, when it comes to the Tawheed and what the Quran says about Tawheed and all of that, the Shia school, of course, isn't too different than other schools. We don't want to make it sound like we have another version of Islam. No. We're going through the doctrines that the Shia school has when it comes to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when it comes to the concept of imamah, the concepts of ma'ad and all of that, of course, based mostly on the Quran, as you've seen so far, because we're going by the book of Ayatullah Jafar Subhani. Okay, so last week we went through articles 44 to articles 44 through 47. So that was 4 articles we went through last week regarding the justice of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Al-Adl al-Ilahi, as it's called. Al-Adl al-Ilahi, there's a lot to talk about when it comes to this topic, but Ayatullah Subhani really, he just keeps it very short in this book, because as I've explained again and again, this book is after keeping things concise and not going into too many details, so that we can go through all of that which we have, the general beliefs of the Shia school of thought. Wa alaikum assalam to all of you who are joining and saying salam. So article 44, we talked about the verses of Quran, some verses of Quran that speak about how God is just, and then we talked about the rational reasoning and proof for God being just. And then we moved on into a hadith that was very nice by the Holy Prophet, that was echoing exactly what we understand with our minds and the intellectual reasoning behind why God cannot be unjust and how He has to be just. And I've also explained that when we say He has to, not that He has to because He's forced to, or He has to because we said so. No, not because of that. As I've explained again and again, what we're doing is understanding that, this is how it's going to be with Him for sure. Not that He's like this because we said so, or so on. So I think that's pretty clear. That doesn't need too much explanation, right? So for example, when I say, it must be day right now, and I figure out with my mind or whatever evidence that I have that it's day right now, and I say it must be day right now, it's not that the earth now is forced to be day. No, that's not how it works. Just the fact that I know something and I say it must be like this doesn't mean it's that thing is now forced to be like that. I think it's very clear. Then we talked a little bit about the Mu'tazilites versus the Ash'arites, and how the Shia school, when it comes to this subject of Al-Adl al-Ilahi and divine justice, how the Shia school is on the side of the Mu'tazilite school. Mu'tazilites are a branch of Sunni school when it comes to theology. So that was also discussed, the differences between these two schools regarding the justice of God. Now we moved on to Article 45. And some of the reasons for believing in objective morality, objective good versus objective evil, and some of the arguments that were there, and some verses that we had in that regard. And then this question came up of that if there is objective good, objective evil, and so on, then why is it that Allah says, I can do whatever I want and I will not be questioned by anyone? لا يسأل عما يفعل وهم يسألون. That Allah in the Quran says He does what He likes and He doesn't get questioned. No one can question Him for what He's doing. Rather, He's the one who asks, and others are the ones who will be questioned. So someone would say that, okay, if God only does good, or if God is just, then why is it that He says this in the Quran, that I can do whatever I like, you can't question me? The answer was pretty clear, that when Allah says it like that, He says, I won't be questioned, because a person that can be questioned where there is a chance of them being unjust. There's a chance of them being mistaken. There's a chance of them being ignorant and negligent of something. But if all of these different reasons for one making the wrong decision and wrong judgment, if they are not applicable to somebody, then of course that person won't be questioned. Yes? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran, when He says He is not questioned for what He does, because He can't be questioned. It's an erroneous question to begin with. Can God be questioned? No, because a person that can be questioned only if there's a chance that they might be mistaken. But if everyone knows 100% that an entity or a being like God is going to be right all the time, there's no room for questioning anymore. We discussed that in depth last week. Then we moved on to Article 46, different manifestation of God's justice. You'll find justice when it comes to His creation. You'll find justice when it comes, and not just justice, but even more than justice, mercy and lutf and grace. When it comes to creation, when it comes to legislating laws and prescribing laws for us, human beings, when it comes to Judgment Day and punishment and reward, Allah's justice, if not more than justice and grace, is going to always be manifesting there. So that was Article 46. 47, Article 47 was kind of repeating and concluding from all of the above that was discussed. And drawing the conclusion that if our perfection and our spiritual development and growth depends on God providing certain guidance, He will provide that guidance. It's something that He has to do, or else He cannot hold us responsible. So that was, in a nutshell, what we covered last week. Now we move on to Article 48 and a new chapter again. What are we talking about here? What we're talking about here is regarding Qadhaa and Qadar. Now those of you who were attending the EIS classes we had here in Dallas, we didn't get to this in our discussions. So here, Ayatullah Subhani, he opens up this chapter of Qadhaa and Qadar. Qadhaa and Qadar al-Ilahi, which means divine. We'll talk about it, what it means. So now, before I talk about that, here in this book, it's not discussed in depth again, as much as it might deserve. At the same time, though, he has covered many of the main points, but then questions might come up that he hasn't really addressed here. One or two main questions that'll come up regarding Qadhaa and Qadar, he does address. Other than that, though, he leaves it for other books and other classes. So, what is Qadhaa and Qadar? What are we talking about here? So we're done with Adl Ilahi, divine justice. As I said before, after going through all of Tawheed and the Sifat of Allah, the qualities of Allah, Ayatullah Subhani, what he does is he isolates 2 or 3 subjects, some of which have to do with God's attributes and qualities, but he separates them, isolates them because of their importance, because of their background in theology and in history, Islamic theological history. So one of them was last week, Adl Ilahi, divine justice. Another one that he isolates is Qadhaa and Qadar that we're going to be covering today. So what is Qadhaa and Qadar? What do they mean? First thing he says is that, look, we have this concept of Qadhaa and Qadar, and these are in the Quran as well. They have been mentioned in the Quran. Before I want to even define them for you, I want to show you some of the verses that the Quran has, which include these words, these terms, and these concepts. So, for example, he says, "Inna kulla shay'in khalaqnahu biqadar." I don't know. I think it might have been better if Ayatullah Subhani just from the get-go had defined what Qadhaa and Qadar are and then gotten to the verses. But he does it the exact opposite. He, in Article 49, gives the definition of Qadhaa and Qadar. In Article 48, which is before 49, he's talking about the verses that we have in the Quran that talk about this concept. You know what I'm going to do actually? I am going to go to Article 49 first, before 48. Just the beginning of it. We talk about what does Qadhaa and Qadar exactly denote, what do they mean, and then talked about the verses of that mention these two concepts, and then go back to Article 49 again, and continue Article 49 with more explanation on these two concepts. So we're going to go to Article 49 first, go through the definition of these two terms, then go back to Article 48, see what verses we have regarding these two concepts, these two terms, and then once we're done with Article 48 and those Quranic verses, move back to Article 49 and cover the rest of it. Okay, so Article 49 talks about the definition. of Qadhaa and Qadar. It says, let me read off of the book, Article 49. It says, the term Qadar in the Arabic language means measure. So it's like what we say in Farsi, miqdar, right? The miqdar of something is the amount of something, the measurement of something. We might have this term in Urdu too, the miqdar. Okay, so Qadar is the root of miqdar. He says the term Qadar in the Arabic language means measure and portion or proportion. And Qadhaa, so that was Qadar. Qadhaa pertains to that which is definite and decided. Okay, so in other words, if I'm going to explain it a little bit more, or use a couple more synonyms for Qadhaa, I would say Qadhaa means to get something done, to execute something, to make it reach the final stage, finish it off, make it definite, make it decided. Yeah, that is Qadhaa. Why do we call a Qadi? Why do we call a Qadi a Qadi? Why? A judge, an Islamic judge. Assalamu alaikum, brother. Islamic judge is referred to in Islam as, or in Islamic legal system as a Qadi. Qadi is a word that derives from Qadhaa, what we're covering right now. Why do we call an Islamic judge a Qadi? Because he does Qadhaa, because he gives a verdict, finishes everything off. After a verdict is issued by a Qadi, no one has any say anymore, right? So that's why he's referred to as Qadi. It comes from this term, Qadhaa. So Qadhaa means to finish something off, to execute something, to give a final verdict on something, push something to 100% and get it done and get it over with. Make it definite. Okay, so that's Qadhaa. And Qadar comes from measurement, the amount of something, the dimensions of something, the amount of something, so on. These are the definitions of these terms. Now, what do they mean in an Islamic text, and from an Islamic perspective, what do they denote exactly? We'll get to that. So we covered the first part of Article 49. Now let's go back to Article 48 and go over some of these verses that talk about how there is Qadhaa and Qadar when it comes to Allah, when it comes to Allah's actions. What does it say? It says, إِنَّا كُلَّ شَيْءٍ خَلَقْنَاهُ بِقَدَرٍ. The Quran, Surah Qamar verse 49 says, إِنَّا كُلَّ شَيْءٍ خَلَقْنَاهُ بِقَدَرٍ. We have created everything with Qadar, in proportion, with proportion and measurement. Yes. Let me see here. Yes. Verily we have created everything by measure. Another verse, وَإِن مِّن شَيْءٍ إِلَّا عِنْدَنَا خَزَائِنُهُ وَمَا نُنَزِّلُهُ إِلَّا بِقَدَرٍ مَعْلُومٍ. That the Quran says, and there is not a thing but with us are the treasures or treasuries thereof. Everything out there, the source and origin of it belongs to us, the Quran says. And then this is the part we need. And we send it not down except in an appointed measure. It's not like we just send everything down. Everything has a measurement. Everything comes in a certain size and amount and measurement. That's for Qadar, brothers and sisters. Now, verses for Qadhaa. Qadhaa, he also brings two verses here. I really appreciate, and I really like how Ayatullah Subhani throughout this book has just brought verse after verse after verse. It's not just a sheer theological or sheer philosophical book that he has here. He really brings verses as much as he can. That is something very valuable. So, two verses we had for Qadar. That look, when it comes to God and Him doing things, what He does is with measurement, with measure and Qadar. What about Qadhaa? What does Qadhaa have in the Quran? It says, وَإِذَا Surah Baqarah verse 117, وَإِذَا قَضَى أَمْرًا فَإِنَّمَا يَقُولُ لَهُ كُن فَيَكُونُ. Or here it says, وَإِذَا قَضَى. I think the verse in its correct form is إِذَا قَضَى أَمْرًا, not وَإِذَا قَضَى أَمْرًا. Anyway, إِذَا قَضَى أَمْرًا فَإِنَّمَا يَقُولُ لَهُ كُن فَيَكُونُ. That when Allah determines something and wants to finalize something, قَضَى أَمْرًا. When He finalizes something, finishes something, executes something, and makes it happen. How does He do that? Through the power of kun fayakun, a takwini command. A takwini command. Be, and it is. So here we have the term Qadhaa. When Allah wants to finish something off and get something done, إِنَّمَا يَقُولُ لَهُ, He will say, be, and it is. Another verse. An'am, verse 2, هُوَ الَّذِي خَلَقَكُم مِّن طِينٍ ثُمَّ قَضَى أَجَلًا. That it is He who has created you from clay and has decreed a term for you. So has finalized a term for you. He knows exactly when you're going to die. Okay? That is in His knowledge. Now, of course, some people might ask, well, what if we change our destiny through the nights of Qadr, through dua, through good actions, and so on and so forth? Those all have an explanation. Allah knows when we're going to die after He knows how many du'as we are going to do and how many nights of Qadr we're going to have praying to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and so on. Anyway, Qadha means to finish something off, to finalize something. So here we have this in the Quran, and this is where this idea comes from, the Qadha of Allah and the Qadar of Allah. Now in Farsi, usually we say Qaza wa Qadar, right? Qaza comes before Qadar when we want to mention it in our language. But the truth of the matter is, and reality is, that Qadar comes before Qadha, right? You measure something first and then you make it, right? You want to make a statue of something. First you decide how big you want that statue to be, and then you actually start chipping away and chiseling at the stone that you're turning into a statue, right? So that's just an example that, I don't know from how to say this, but if we're not chronologically, but if we're to give it an order in our minds, to measure something it comes before you actually creating it, right? That's how it works. Although when it comes to Allah, the measurement and the actual bringing into existence and finalization, they are all happening at the same time. But if you're going to give them an order in your mind, Qadar comes before Qadha, okay? So this is not something that he's pointed to, of course, in this book. I'm just saying this on the side. Alright. Yes, Assalamu alaikum to others who have joined and saying salam as well. Alright. So he says, based on these verses that we have, that we just covered, these 4 verses, 2 for Qadar, 2 for Qadha, and as you can see, he brought the verses for Qadar first and then brought the verses for Qadha, which shows that if you're going to give it an order, Qadar comes before Qadha. He says, because of these verses, and probably more as well, Qadha and Qadar are not something that you can deny. Never. They cannot be denied. These concepts are in the Quran, these terms are in the Quran, they have a specific meaning. They have a specific meaning, and we have to try to figure out what they actually signify, what they actually mean. We covered the definition in the beginning, right? But what do they exactly mean, and what are the details? Now, before we get into those details, he makes a disclaimer. And not that he just makes this disclaimer. This is a disclaimer you find in our ahadith as well. When people would approach the Prophet or the Imams, it's not like the Imams and the Prophet would give an answer to this for everyone, a generic answer for everyone. No. Each person, their mental capacity differs from others. And so if you're gonna explain something to them, sometimes you have to keep it at a minimum. Sometimes for some people you can give more details. Some people's minds are more philosophical, some are less philosophical. Just the other night, someone was telling me, Shaykh, I hate these philosophical discussions. I like fiqh, I like ahkam. This is why I know there are a lot of other people out there who prefer philosophy and mystical concepts more than fiqh. They say it's dry. So every person is different, really. And so because of this difference in intellect, this difference in intellectual capacity, the Prophet, the Imams, when they would explain these concepts, if they were asked of them, they would keep them to a minimum for some, and they would go and elaborate more for others. Now, and that's why we have in Nahj al-Balagha, it says that Imam Ali was asked about Qadar. And what did he say? To this person, he said, Tariqun Mudlim. You're asking about Qadar? It is a dark path and road. Tariqun Mudlim fala taslukuh. So don't try to traverse this path. Wa bahrun amiq fala talijuh. So this is a deep sea, don't dive into it. Wa sirrullah fala tatakallafuh. And this is one of the secrets of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So don't try to take it upon yourselves to learn about it. So this is on one hand. But the same Imam Ali, in other books they say, like Kitab al-Tawheed of Shaykh al-Saduq, there are hadiths, or maybe in other parts of Nahj al-Balagha even, there are parts where Imam Ali elaborates on the same thing he told this person not to get close to. Why is that? It's because people are of different intellectual capacities. Okay, so far we went through the verses that have to do with Qadhaa and Qadar. We also discussed what the approach of the Imams was and the Prophet was regarding this issue. Why were they not sharing all the details with some people, brothers and sisters? Because if a person misunderstands some of these concepts, it can really affect their lives negatively. It can even get you to a point where you believe in predestination, that we are all forced to be good or evil in our lives. Why? Because God is the one who decrees. God is the one who measures everything. And God is the one who gives the final verdict and finalizes things and makes them actually happen. Right? For some people, discussing these things, not only will it not do them good, it will do them bad. Others, no, they understand more. In this day and age, people are a little more smart, but I will tell you this because based on my experiences, we've got some people out there still that it would be better not to get too into detail when it comes to these things with them as well. Anyway, so that's Article 48. Going to Article 49, we already did the definition of Qadhaa and Qadar. Let's actually come to the explanation, a little bit more explanation here of what's going on when Allah says Qadhaa and Qadar. Thank you, Brother Sahur, for tuning in and saying that you're going to actually watch this today. All right. And brother says philosophy all the way. So you like philosophy more. That's good. I like everything, to be honest. All right. It says here in the book, it says commentary on Qadar, commentary on Qadhaa. So, in other words, he wants to get into details now a little bit. As I said, the book itself is concise, and so all in all, you can't expect too much, but what we need we'll get, inshallah. He says, when he's talking about Qadar first, Ayatullah Subhani, he says there's 4 points here. We have 4 points. Number 1, he says every mumkinul wujud out there, every contingent being, everything except God, let's say, everything except God has restrictions, has boundaries, and thus has a measurement, right? The only being out there that is unlimited in everything is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is the wajib al-wujud, the necessary being, they call it. Versus the mumkin al-wujuds out there, anything that is mumkin al-wujud will have some boundary, some restriction, some place where that thing will end and will not exist after that. Okay? Other than God. Okay, so he says, Ayatullah Subhani says, everything out there has a had, has a restriction, has a boundary. After that it won't go. And so that means measurement. Okay, so everything has a measurement. Everything has an amount. Wa alaikum assalam, Brother Sadiq, and welcome. Everything has an amount. That's number 1. Number 2, if the existence of things, of all of these things, all of these mumkinul wujuds, all of these contingent beings out there, if their existence itself depends on God, then their measurement, their proportions will also depend on God. Think about it. A person who wants to, as I gave an example before, wants to make a statue of an elephant, right? You want to make a statue of an elephant. Before you actually make it, you have to pick out a stone that you want to use, or a piece of block of wood, or whatever you're going to use to make a statue. First, look at the dimensions of it. Figure out how much of it you have to cut off so that you get like a nice round, I don't know, block of stone or wood or whatever, so that you can actually carve out an elephant from this. So this elephant is going to be this big. So all the measurements are going to take place first. And then once the measurements take place, that's when you actually bring it into existence, this statue, by chiseling at that stone, actually. All right. So the one who is going to bring something into existence is also the one who is responsible for its proportions, for its measurements and dimensions and so on. So that's point number 2 that he makes. Everything relies on God, not just the existence of things, but the qadar of things as well. Number 2. Number 3, he says, look, in addition to all of this, all of these examples I've given so far, all of the things that we've talked about so far have to do with things out there that are going to be created, right? So the things out there that are going to be created, they have to have measurements, they have to have proportions. But he says, look, the qadar and qadha of Allah doesn't just apply to creation and existence. It also has to do with laws and legislation too. The qadha and qadar of Allah also applies to His laws. What does that mean? That means that when He wants to set a law and prescribe something for mankind, what does He do before it? He weighs things out, makes it, sees how far it can go, how much this does this person bear the burden for it or not. If they don't, then I'm gonna leave it this much, this big, this small, this narrow in scope, this wide in scope. Like eating haram meat. Haram meat is always haram, or is haram in normal circumstances. Not when a person is dying in the desert and the only way to survive is to consume haram meat. How is he going to do all of these things, these measurements, these weighing out of things? All of this has to do with the qadar of Allah. So the qadar of Allah doesn't just apply to creation and existence. It also applies to legislation as well. It also applies to tashri' and sharia as well. Alright. That's the third point Ayatullah Subhani makes. So now, so far we've gotten a good idea of what is meant by the qadar of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. How much rain is going to come down? You know, how big will a fig tree get versus a tomato plant? You know, you never have a tomato plant the size of the beanstalk of Jack in the story of Jack and the Beanstalk, right? Everything has a measurement. That's for creation. Also, God's laws will have measurement. That's in tashri'ah. Alright, that's the third point. Fourth point, he says, when we talk about the qadar of Allah, the measurement of Allah, and how the divine measurement, and how God is behind all of that, this really has to do with the khaliqiyya of Allah. So this is something that Allah does. This is an attribute of God. This is a quality of God, the fact that He measures. Since this measurement is a subcategory of creation, and the creation of God, and the khaliqiyya, the creatorship of Allah, let's call it, then this has to do with the knowledge of Allah. You see, he backtracks it. He goes from qadar of Allah, he says that has to do with creation, and then when it comes to creation, when God wants to create, we said before, creation is a quality of action. The qualities of action have to go back to a quality of essence of God. What is that quality of essence of God that creatorship goes back to? It goes back to knowledge, goes back to power. So Allah and His qadar has to do with His unlimited knowledge and unlimited power as well. So it goes back to those. So these are 4 main points he mentions about qadar. Number 1, every mumkin al-wujud has a boundary. Because it has a boundary, then it has measurement. It has something that has to, an amount. Okay? Assalamu alaikum, Brother Muhammad. That's point number 1. Point number 2, that if we want to figure out who is the one who measures things, we look at who created them. Since Allah is the creator of everything, there is no way but to say that the measurement of things that He creates also is in His hands. Number 2. Number 3, when we say qadar applies not only to the creation of things, it also applies to the prescription of laws for mankind, and that's called Qadar Tashri'i or Qadar Ilmi. Number 4, he said, was that believing in Qadar goes back to believing in God's creatorship, which goes back to God's knowledge and power and stuff. Okay, so that's Qadar. Now let's talk about Qadha. What is your explanation for Qadha, O Ayatullah Subhani? Let's read off of the book for this one. It says, commentary on Qadha, or explanation of Qadha. As I said before, this translation of this book, sometimes I feel like it's unnecessarily complicated, and it could have been more fluent and flowed better. So, for example, in the Farsi book, it says Tafsir Qaza, which means explanation of Qadha. But if you want an equivalent for tafsir, it's commentary, right? So the translation says commentary on Qadha, which is fine. But I'm just saying, I don't know. I don't like it too much. I don't feel like it flows as much as I would want it to. But anyway, that's beyond what we want to talk about right now. What is Qadha? Explain it to us. He says, as mentioned above, Qadha is to be understood as the bestowal of definitive existence upon an entity. Definitive existence. Alright? Upon an entity. So something wants to come into existence. Right? What is it that causes something to come from out of nothingness and actually exist now? What is that thing? What is that catalyzer? It is the Qadha of Allah. It is the will of Allah to actually finalize this thing and bring it into existence. He goes on to say, naturally the process by which this definitive existence is attained rests upon the operation of the law of cause and effect. Philosophical causality, brothers and sisters, is what brings things into existence. So the Qadha of Allah follows the law of causality, he's saying. Okay. A thing receives its existence as a result of the complete actualization of the cause of its existence. Insofar as this law of causality derives ultimately from God, and I've discussed this before, by the way. We've discussed this before in that vertical chain of causes and effects where Allah sits at the top of that chain. This is what he's saying now. He says, insofar as this law of causality derives ultimately from God, because he sits at the top of that chain, the reality of the definitive nature of each existing entity rests upon the power and will of God. Very simple. So, things coming into existence, who is the one who has the final say? Who has the final verdict? Who issues the final verdict? Who actually brings it into existence? It is the will of God and God Himself. And that is referred to as the Qadha of Allah. So I don't want brothers and sisters to think that something comes into existence, right? Its coming into existence is different than the actual Qadha of Allah. As if God, He does Qadha of something and then it comes to existence. No, the fact that God brings it into existence, that is the Qadha of Allah. That is the finalization of Allah. That is Allah pushing that thing into existence. Right? We refer to that as the Qadha of Allah. Right? That is the actual, these judges, when they actually, what's that hammer called? The anvil hammer, whatever they call it. Someone help me out, one of you guys watching. Brother Kamran, if you can help me with this word. That word that that thing the judge uses to slam on his table when he actually passes the verdict. That hitting of the hammer on, so what do you have? Oh, the gavel. Okay, thank you. The gavel. When he actually hits the gavel to whatever that thing is on his table, that's the actual verdict now taking effect. Right? That is the Qadha of Allah. What does that translate to when it comes to philosophy? Qadha of Allah. Existence of something right there. So let's call it Allah's gavel coming down equals His Qadha, equals existence of something and the creation of something. Alright? That is Qadha. Then he goes into something else, Ayatullah Subhani, which I don't want to get into because there are no practical implications to that. All he says is that now we have a Qadha amali, practical Qadha, we have Qadha fi'li and ilmi. and these are two things, but they're, what they are exactly, it's not that important, brothers and sisters. That's why I'm not going to get into it at all. So here he goes on to describe what I already explained, the third point that I explained up there. I have changed the order a little bit of the book. Now he starts talking about how we have Qadhaa and Qadar when it comes to creation, and Qadhaa and Qadar when it comes to the laws of God. He says all of that, and then now I want to share with you a hadith that he brings to just as something extra here, to show that we have this in our hadiths as well. The fact that the Qadhaa and Qadar of Allah applies also to legislation and Islamic law. But before that, let me see what this question says. It says, is there an indefinite existence as well? I ask because the term definite existence is used, so I'm wondering if there was a reason for the distinction. For now, let us say that there are definite forms of existence and indefinite forms of existence. The indefinite, of course, being God Himself, versus all other contingent beings. All other contingent beings are definite in their existence. They have boundaries and so on. Let's just say it like that for now. Or else, yes, in mysticism and even in philosophy, transcendent philosophy of Mullah Sadra and others also, you will have this concept that existence cannot be definite. Existence is existence, it's indefinite. But I don't want to get into that. It's a good question, it's a deeper question. We can discuss it later sometime, over chai maybe, regarding like how this exactly works. But for now, the way we see this universe, there are definite forms of existence, like everything out there. Myself, this book, that tree, that house, that car, versus indefinite existence, which is God, which is the wajib al-wujud and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay, so coming back to what we were talking about. God's qadar and qadha applies to not only creation, it applies also to legislation. It also applies to divine law. And that is why in some hadiths we have our imams referring to this form of Qadhaa and Qadar. So it says here that Imam Ali alayhi salam was asked about Qadhaa and Qadar by somebody, and he answered with this example and with this form of Qadhaa and Qadar, the one that has to do with legislation. He didn't even touch on the form that has to do with creation and how things are created with proportion. The Imam didn't even touch on that. He only talked about legislation. He said, the hadith says, what is meant by Qadhaa and Qadar, as he's answering this individual, is how Allah commands for ta'ah, tells people that they have to obey Him, and tells them to refrain from disobedience, and how He gives power to mankind to do good actions, and gives them the willpower and the power to refrain from bad actions, and how He gives them the chance to get close to Him, and how He allows the sinners to go after they've made the decision that they don't want to have anything to do with God, how He relieves them of any form of, not relieves them, but lets them go to be on their own, and they just go deeper and deeper into wrong and evil. He said these are forms of Allah's Qadhaa and Qadar when it comes to our actions. The Imam answers him. Ayatullah Subhani here, his understanding of this hadith is that this has to do with this form of Qadhaa and Qadar. The one that has to do with divine law. Right? And then he goes on, Ayatullah Subhani explains how, look, the Imam didn't answer this person completely, excuse me, because this person probably didn't have the capacity to understand more than that. And that's why the hadith goes on to say, وَأَمَّا غَيْرُ ذَلِكَ فَلَا تَظُنَّهُ فَإِنَّ الظَّنَّ لَهُ مُحْبِطٌ لِلْأَعْمَالِ. He says, that other forms of Qadhaa and Qadar, don't worry about them. Why? Because a person who starts because if you go after that and then you develop an understanding or a conjecture regarding that understanding, that misunderstanding and misconjecture is going to get rid of your a'mal, all the good that you've done, because It might even move you towards and push you towards kufr, because you might not understand it. So you see how the Imam answers this person and answers individuals based on the capacity they have, the intellectual capacity they have. I think there's a famous hadith by the Holy Prophet that نحن معاشر الأنبياء نكلم الناس على قدر عقولهم. When we speak to people, us prophets, we speak to them based on their intellectual capacity, not more. على قدر عقولهم. Alright, so we have a question here. Thanks for tuning in, Ali Agha. He says, when you get the chance, what about the verse that says, He guides whom He desires and misguides whomever He desires? يُضِلُّ مَنْ يَشَاء يَهْدِي مَنْ يَشَاء. How does that work with Qadhaa and Qadar? If it's calculated, couldn't the earlier tests be set up easy and clear? So, towards the end of this chapter, Ayatullah Subhani does touch on that a little bit. Let's get there and then we'll see what he says. Yeah, we'll leave it for there. Alright, so moving on to Article 50. And this is Article 50, by the way. So that means we are 1/3 through our book, Alhamdulillah. Yeah, we have 2/3 to go. Most of it, we're going to move slowly into prophethood later. And that's going to probably be in the month of Ramadan. And after that, Imamah and so on. Those parts will get interesting. I know we've done Tawheed a lot. We'll get to prophethood and Imamah as well, which will be nice, inshallah. So we're at the 50 article mark. That's 1/3 of the book, Alhamdulillah. Before I go to Article 50, Brother Muhammad says the Qadr uqulihim is also an example of Qadr. Yeah, that came to my mind when I said it, actually. Ala Qadri uqulihim. Not the Qadhaa and Qadar we're talking about right now in theology, but the word Qadr has been used in that hadith, which also means to the amount and to the capacity of their intellects. So yeah, a good point. Anyway, or a good observation. Article number 50 talks about how if we say that God has a say in the qadar of things, and it is He who gets things to happen actually, then that might imply that we have no say in our actions, that we are predestined in a sense. Although he doesn't use this word, predestination, he probably will talk about it in the next chapter, which has to do with mankind and free will, which is a super important concept in Islam. If you take out free will, if you take free will out of the equation, brothers and sisters, there will be no point in our creation to begin with. Okay? So that is a very important topic. He might discuss it more there. Here he ends with Article 50, just discussing, hey, if we have Allah's divine decree in things, then that means we are predestined in all the good and bad that we might do. He very nicely says this, and there's a very simple answer to this, although this has caused doubt for a lot of people. And that's why it is super important, brothers and sisters, especially those of us who are, Sunday school instructors, or those of us who are parents and have kids, and how we talk to our children about these Islamic concepts. If I'm going to explain divine decree to my children, I better be careful not to make it sound like, hey, you have no say in anything, and it is only God that has the say in everything. Hey, you don't have to, not that the parents will actually say this, but God, whatever you do, in the end, it's what God wants. That means that, hey, even if you try your best to be successful in life, you're not going to be or there's a chance you won't be, because at the end of the day, it's what God wills. No, we have to understand properly ourselves how God's Qadhaa and Qadar works, and then properly explain it to the next generation as well. So here it goes, very simple, that when it comes to Allah's Qadar and Qadhaa regarding our actions, it's a little different than when it comes to the tree or the elephant or other objects, other creation. For us, when it comes to Allah's Qadar and Qadhaa, what He brings into the equation is our own decisions as well. So, what does He, in His measurement, and in His Qadhaa, when He actually wants to now, that measured thing wants to happen, or come into existence, or take action, What is it exactly that he is deciding on? For an elephant, for a tree, Allah's measurement will go like this. It'll be like, okay, if proper food reaches this plant and this animal, proper rain, proper sunlight, all of these things, this plant will grow into a tree. In this equation, we didn't have the tree's will, or if the tree likes. No, we didn't have any of that. All we had was proper sunlight, proper food, proper water, rain, all of that. This plant will grow into a tree. No one stomping on it, no one cutting it down, all of these different things. Nowhere did you have if the plant likes it or not, if the plant makes this decision or not. But when it comes to mankind, we have two dimensions to us. You need to pay attention here. We have the physical aspect, and we've talked about this before as well. We have the physical aspect of us, which is no different than the animalistic aspect of an elephant. Where if we eat food, and if we take care of ourselves, and we don't get run over by a truck, or anything like that, we will grow and mature into adults, whether we like it or not. That's one dimension of us, one aspect. But then there's another dimension of us that has to do with the spiritual side of us, and the spiritual growth of us, right? And how that depends on us and our intellects, and how we reason, and how we weigh things out, and look at the bad, at the good of things, and so on. And then we take action, we do things, right? Here, Allah, if I'm going to throw something, if let's say I'm going to throw a ball, okay, I want to throw a ball, me throwing the ball depends on Allah's Qadar also, Allah's Qadhaa. The ball going this far, the ball actually going that distance. If Allah does not will it, it won't happen, yes. But what is Allah exactly willing when it comes to mankind and His actions that come from free will? Is exactly that. Allah wills that which we have willed. This is super important. Super important. And this is the part we fail to explain to others, the next generation, our kids, and sometimes it hurts them. When it came to the plant, the tree, the animal, in there, as I said, you did not have this idea of if the animal wants, it'll grow. If the plant wants, it'll grow. No, we didn't have that. But when it comes to our actions will be dependent on Allah, yes, but us also. As I said before, there's a vertical chain of causes and effects. Our will, our decision is at the very bottom. When I throw a ball, I feel like I threw it because the last link in the chain of causes and effects is me. So I see that last link, Think about it. You have a chandelier, hanging down from your ceiling. This chain that's holding the chandelier, usually the last link of it is exposed, because if you expose the whole chain, it's gonna make your ceiling look ugly. That defeats the purpose of a chandelier. You see the last link only, and you're like, yeah, look, this last link is holding it. Little do you know that there's a whole chain that is not exposed, right? So using that example, we feel like we're the ones doing things, right? While in reality, at the top of the chain sits Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We only see the last link, which is our decision and our actual action, and we think that we're doing it. No, Allah has willed it from above. But what has Allah willed? Allah has willed that which I have willed. This is super important. So if that's the case, Allah's will and Allah's Qadhaa doesn't go against our will, our decisions. No, it does not. It actually is supporting what we do. But we have to always remember that if He hadn't willed it, yeah, I can't will it either. The same way, if the top link of the chain is not connected to the ceiling, then of course the bottom link of the chain won't be able to hold up the chandelier. The chandelier will drop. Yes? So, for the top link though, to hold the chandelier, you will need the bottom link of the chain as well. For us to do things, Allah's will is necessary at the top and our will is necessary at the bottom. But when you actually dissect it, who's really doing the job here? The one at the top. But the one at the top, because of the chandelier, won't be able to do it without the bottom link as well. Right? So Allah wills it first, in a sense, and He wills it first, and then, but what is it that He wills? That which we have willed. And so we do it, and we can do it if we want, we can not do it if we don't want. If we will it, Allah wills it. If we don't will it, Allah doesn't will it. Right? So, which one comes first, as you're asking? Brother is asking, which one comes first, which one comes second? We can't give it a chronological order. They happen simultaneously. Right? They happen simultaneously. But if you were to kind of give it an order, Allah has given us permission to will things, we will things, or Allah has willed that we will, and when we will, He wills. So it's God, us, then God again, if you want to give it an order. Okay? Sister is asking, what about those acts that harm others? The acts that harm others, the same thing applies. Allah willed that we will, and so when I will something wrong, Allah hasn't willed something wrong here. Allah has willed that I will. So if I do that bad act, it is with God's permission. But I can't ascribe it to God at the same time, because my will had to do with the wrongness and the rightness of that thing. Now, this is the explanation that we can give. There might be a deeper philosophical, even mystical explanation to this as well, right? Which will go very deep, but these types of explanations will be reserved for those who have what it takes to actually understand. And sometimes even it's not even about understanding, brothers and sisters, it's about actually experiencing and seeing these things. About how Allah is in charge of everything, although we're still making decisions. Yeah, this is exactly what mystics are trying to reach through their worship and through their asceticism. They're trying their best to reach a point where they actually experience God's command over everything and will over everything, although we still have a will, right? So, if we're going to explain it to, through the Quran, through the Hadiths, through theology and all of that, the explanation is what I said. Allah willed and gave permission to us to decide things, to will things. And once we do that, then He says, okay, that's what you willed, it's going to happen. Right? We can't separate these and give them chronological order. It's not like one happens a minute before, one happens a minute after. But if you're gonna give it an order, it's like that, what I said. At least that's how much I understand of how what the order looks like. Alright, so with the Qadar of Allah, when it comes to us, when He wants to see whether or not, what to give us, what not to give us, He gives us this much, that He gives us the power to will things. That's the Qadar of Allah. And then so He actually creates us as willful creations and creatures. Once that happens, when we actually will something and do it, His Qadha actually allows that to happen. His Qadha is the action actually happening and taking place. Okay? Okay, so now, having said all of that, this understanding that some have, he says, Ayatullah Subhani goes on, that, people who are sinners, for example, that they can somehow say that, when it comes to our sins, we have no choice. God is the one who does Qadha and Qadar. The answer is no. Allah finalizes whatever you decide. Okay? And so he explains that a little bit, and he brings a verse. The verse says, Inna hadaynahu sabil, imma shakiran wa imma kafura. That we guided you, showed you the right path. Now you can be grateful and take it and actually implement it, or you can be kafur and be ungrateful and not implement it. Brother asks, is this related to the covenant that was given to man and which made him to be always oppressing and ignorant? Not necessarily. You have to first bring the hadith or the verse that says that. I'm probably thinking you're talking about the Alam al-Zar maybe. I don't know. If you can provide the verse that actually says that, I'd appreciate it. I do remember something, إِنَّهُ ظَلُومٌ كَفَّارٌ or something like that, I'm not sure. كَانَ ظَلُومًا جَهُولًا. Yeah, إِنَّهُ كَانَ ظَلُومًا جَهُولًا. It's not talking about, see, this verse is not saying that, and that's why I asked for the verse. It's not saying, if you translate it, the verse, it's not going to be the wording that you have here, where you say always oppressing and ignorant. It's talking about how mankind can be dhaloom and can be jahul, can be ignorant, can be dhaloom. If you can give me the beginning of the verse too, I'll appreciate it, to put it in context. That Allah, from what I remember, is like, Allah is like kind of, for lack of better words, is kind of complaining about mankind and what He does. And in the end He says, yeah, mankind is dhaloom and jahul. In other words, the things that he does that are wrong is out of the dhulm and out of the jahil that he has. And so it's like kind of a verse that God is complaining about us, and it seems to be kind of fed up from some of the people that are out there. That's one verse he brings. Inna hadaynahu sabila imma shakiran wa imma kafura. That's one verse he brings to show that, look, even if I'm doing qadha and qadar, don't think that you don't have a decision. You don't have responsibility. Another verse that's even better, Surah An'am, verse 148. سَيَقُولُ الَّذِينَ أَشْرَكُوا لَوْ شَاءَ اللَّهُ مَا أَشْرَكْنَا وَلَا آبَاؤُنَا وَلَا حَرَّمْنَا مِنْ شَيْءٍ. That the people who are mushrik, they're going to say that if Allah had willed, we would have not been mushrik. We would, not us and not our fathers and forefathers. And we would have not made things haram that are not haram. Right? What does the verse end though with? It says, كَذَلِكَ كَذَّبَ الَّذِينَ مِنْ قَبْلِهِمْ حَتَّى ذَاقُوا بَأْسَنَا. That's the exact same things people before them said, those who were denying God. And so they also tasted the punishment. In other words, this is a faulty argument and is not acceptable. Alright? So now let's see. Okay, so brother has brought the verse. This one. إِنَّا عَرَضْنَا الْأَمَانَةَ عَلَى السَّمَوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ وَالْجِبَالِ فَأَبَيْنَ أَن يَحْمِلْنَهَا. That we gave the amana, whatever that trust was, we entrusted mankind with, we gave it to the skies, we gave it to the earth, we gave it to the mountains, and they said, no, we can't bear the burden of the amana. But insan accepted this amana, and of course this verse is metaphorical, so we have to see the tafsir of this verse. So mankind accepted it, but although he accepted it, innahu kana dhaluman jahula. At the same time, although you are bearing this amana, whatever this amana and trust is, yet you are still dhalum and jahul. You still do dhulm sometimes, and you still are acting upon your ignorance sometimes. So what we talked about, if you're asking, Brother Muhammad, if you're asking if this is related, what we're talking about of qadha and qadar and how it does not go against our free will, if when you say, is this related to this verse, in a sense you can say it is related to it, because it also illustrates how at the end of the day we choose to be dhaloom, we choose to be jahul, and not do what we're supposed to do, not fulfill that amana that we have, right? It's in our hands. This is a qadar of Allah, that He gives a qadar, a measurement of Allah, something that Allah weighed out and felt that this is something, not felt, I don't want to sound like felt like, oh, maybe not. No, He knew that this is an amana that can be carried by mankind, and that's why He bestowed it upon us and then entrusted us with it. Yet we're not ready and willing to bear the burden of it. Okay, so Brother Muhammad continues. He says, I'm saying, would the amana be the free will, that is the will of God? I wouldn't say it's translates to the free will. The amana is the free will. We have to see what the tafasir say. But it will necessarily, I think, have to do with free will. So amana would probably be the deen, or probably be the responsibility of, developing spiritually to a point that we deserve Jannah. Within this lies through our free will. So the free will be part of, or will be a condition of this amana, probably, if I'm getting it right. Once again, it depends on the tafsir. We have to look at the tafsir and what they say. But if you ask me, yes, I think amana would have something to do with this free will that Allah has given us. So Brother Ali, I don't know if you're being sarcastic or not. He says, so drug dealers are fine and gun control is not in line with divine philosophy. I'll just leave the question there. The question answers itself, okay? All right, so finally, what we have here is, I'm just going to read off of the book for Article 50, the last paragraph. It says, to conclude this discussion, let us remind ourselves that the universal pathways established by God. Now here the word is, the equivalent that has been used is universal pathways. Like, you guys tell me, what do you understand from this word? I don't know. Since I have the Farsi in front of me, then maybe, I can tell what's going on. But if I didn't have the Farsi in front of me, this equivalent that's used, I don't know, brothers and sisters. It's hard to understand. So this just echoes more what I'm saying about translations, But I mean, once again, we thank all those who actually go through the trouble of translating these books and trying to get these ma'arif and teachings across to the masses and to the Shia out there. All I'm saying is, but when it comes to these things, you can be critical. And it's good to be critical. That's what academics is all about. So now, here it says, let us remind ourselves that the universal pathways established by God, right? Universal pathways here, the Farsi says, sunnat-hay kulliye khudavand, which means those general methods of God and the general tradition, the tradition of God, how God does things generally. Okay? How God does things generally. That is meant here, that is what is meant here by universal pathways. Those universal laws that God has sometimes that are referred to as sunan ilahiyya, or sunnats of God. Okay? So for example, one of those sunnats of God, one of those divine laws of God is that if a people, and this is, in the past we've had these, the Quran tells us, divine books tell us of this, of divine punishments that would befall a people as a result of them turning 110% away from God, right? Those were sunan, those are the sunnats of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? How a punishment might befall a people. And other sunnahs of Allah. If you are patient, Allah will eventually help you. That's a sunnah of Allah. That is one of these universal laws of God that apply to the people. Alright, so now it says, to conclude this discussion, let us remind ourselves that the universal pathways or universal sunnahs of God in the created universe, these pathways are but manifestations of divine predestination, and man alone has the freedom to choose either of these paths. Yes, when the time comes for this law to actually be taken into action, this divine law of God, we have no free will there anymore. Like Prophet Nuh's people, when the flood came, it's not like, okay God, our free will now, we're going to say stop. No. When those things come, and this is going back to Brother Ali's question, that are we forced, when Allah says God misguides people, whoever He likes, and God guides whoever He likes, if we choose God's divine guidance, if we choose God's divine punishment, yes, it'll come no matter what after that. Cause and effect. The fact that you chose it was in your hands, or you stayed away from it is in your hands. But once you make the choice, then when it comes, it comes. You can't say that, go Allah, don't misguide me, although I'm an idol worshipper, although I take innocent lives, although I don't pray, fast, all these things. Oh, why did God, misguide me? You chose misguidance, but for misguidance to actually take place for you, God has to actually give the verdict. So once again, it falls under the same explanation that I gave before 10 minutes ago. That God wills that which we will. Once we will something, the effect will come. That's the cause, the effect will come. If I have chosen misguidance with my free will, God will give me misguidance. If I have chosen guidance with my free will, Allah will give me guidance. In the end, Allah gives guidance and misguidance. So, that verse that Brother Ali, you cited, يُضِلُّ مَنْ يَشَاء يَهْدِي مَنْ يَشَاء, that's the explanation to it. That Allah wills guidance and misguidance for people, yes. But based on what? Allah doesn't do things the way we do things. Allah wills things as a result of our will, as a result of our decision. If a person wills guidance, does whatever prerequisites are necessary for guidance, guidance will come from Allah. if a person does whatever it takes to now draw in misguidance, then Allah misguides. So when it says Allah guides and misguides whoever He wants, it's not like just randomly, but rather it's whoever wills it for themselves. Ahsant, Brother Muhammad. He's adding here that it also, the verses that say guidance and misguidance, God guides whoever He wants and misguides whoever He wants, they end with وَمَا يُضِلُّ بِهِ إِلَّا الْفَاسِقُونَ, that Allah only will misguide the ones who are fasiq, who are the ones who turn away from Allah, and so on and so forth. So you have to turn away. When you turn away, misguidance will stop coming, or guidance will stop coming, and that equals misguidance. So yeah, as you can see, if these verses are not seen in light of these theological explanations, they might seem like very unfair things. Yeah, and so that's why it's super important to understand these verses through these explanations that our ulama have given, through the hadiths and through other verses, and also just getting very specific about the wording of these verses, and seeing that God, it's not that He just randomly guides and misguides whoever He likes. Oh, this guy is good looking, let's guide him. This person is not good looking, let's misguide them. That's not how it works. Allah wills guidance for whomever He wishes, equals God wills guidance from whoever wills it for themselves. Yes. So thank you guys for tuning in. This was a pretty long session, and I'm kind of sweating here too. Mashallah, it was a good one. Lots of back and forth, and this is a very deep discussion that, as I said, there are many more aspects to it maybe that aren't even discussed here, have to be discussed in philosophy and even in irfan, and not just theoretical irfan, but practical irfan even. Yeah. And so, but all in all, I really like the explanation and how concise he kept it here. This concludes Article 50 and also the chapter on Qadhaa and Qadar. Next week we have a chapter on Insan and free will, the third and last of the three isolated topics that Ayatullah Subhani has isolated from the Tawheed discussion, which because of their importance. The last one we'll have next week, and with that we have finished 1/3 of our book. Inshallah, Allah gives tawfiq and health and life to all of us to continue and inshallah go to the end of this book. I thank all of you once again. Keep us in your du'as. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.